Julian Thorne looked at the digital guest list for the most important night of his life and did the unthinkable. With a single tap of his finger, he deleted his wife's name. He thought she was too plain, too simple, and too embarrassing to stand beside him at the Billionaire's Vanguard Gala. He thought he was protecting his image. He had no idea he was signing his own death warrant. He didn't know that the woman waiting at home in sweatpants wasn't just a housewife. He didn't know that the entire gala wasn't organized for him, but by her. When the doors of the grand hall finally opened, Julian didn't just lose his reputation. He realized he had been living in the shadow of a queen. And tonight, the queen was coming for her crown. The air in the penthouse office of Thorne Enterprises smelled of espresso, expensive leather, and arrogance. Julian Thorne, a man who had recently graced the cover of Forbes under the headline, "The Future of Tech," stood by the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the grey skyline of Manhattan. He adjusted his bespoke cuffs, the gold links catching the dull afternoon light. "Sir, the final guest list for the Vanguard Gala is being sent to the printer in 10 minutes, his executive assistant, Marcus, said. Marcus was a young man, efficient and observant, who had been with the company long enough to see the cracks in the foundation that Julian ignored. Julian turned, walking back to the mahogany desk. "Let me see it one last time." Marcus handed over the tablet. Julian scrolled through the names. It was a who's who of the global elite. Senators, oil tycoons from Texas, tech moguls from Silicon Valley, and European royalty. It was the night Julian had been working toward for 5 years. Tonight, he wasn't just attending. He was the keynote speaker. He was expected to announce the merger that would make him a billionaire 3 times over. His finger paused on one name near the top of the VIP list. Mrs. Ilara Thorne. Julian's lip curled slightly. A mixture of annoyance and embarrassment flared in his chest. He thought of Ilara. Sweet, quiet Ilara. The woman who wore oversized sweaters, who spent her days tending to her garden on their Connecticut estate, and whose idea of a wild night was baking sourdough bread. She was the woman who had supported him when he was a broke college student. Yes, she had paid the rent when his first startup failed, but that was then. This was now. "She doesn't fit," Julian muttered to himself. "Sir?" Marcus asked, confused. "Ilara," Julian said, his voice cold. She's not ready for this crowd, Marcus. You know how she gets. She stands in the corner holding a glass of water. She doesn't know how to network. She wears dresses that look like they came from a department store rack. Tonight is about power. It's about image." Julian thought about the woman waiting for him in the lobby of the Ritz-Carlton right now. Isabella Ricci. Isabella was a model-turned-brand ambassador. She was sharp, hungry, and breathtakingly beautiful in a way that demanded attention. She knew how to laugh at bad jokes, how to whisper in the ears of investors, and exactly how to look good on his arm for the paparazzi. "Delete her," Julian said. Marcus blinked, stunned. "Delete? Mrs. Thorne? Sir, she's your wife. It's the Vanguard Gala. It's customary for spouses to—" "I said delete her," Julian snapped, slamming the tablet down on the desk. "I am the CEO of this company, Marcus. I decide who represents us. Ilara is a liability tonight. I need to close the deal with the Sterling Group. If Arthur Sterling sees me with a housewife who can't discuss macroeconomics, he'll think I'm soft. Delete her name. Remove her security clearance. If she shows up, she doesn't get in." Marcus hesitated, a look of deep discomfort crossing his face. He liked Ilara. She remembered his birthday when Julian didn't. She sent soup when he was sick. But he needed this job. "As you wish, Mr. Thorne," Marcus said, quietly, tapping the screen. Ilara Thorne Deleted. Good. Julian straightened his tie, checking his reflection. I'll tell her the event was made, men only for the board members. She's gullible, she'll believe it. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. Send the car around for Miss Ricci. She's accompanying me tonight. Julian walked out of the office, feeling lighter. He felt powerful. He had trimmed the fat. He was ready to conquer the world. He had no idea that the notification of the deletion didn't just go to the event organizers. It went to a secure, encrypted server in a basement office in Zurich, a server owned by the holding company that secretly owned the majority share of Thorn Enterprises. And 5 minutes later, in the garden of their Connecticut estate, Elara Thorn's phone buzzed. Elara Thorn wiped the soil from her hands onto her apron. She was 32, with soft features and eyes the color of polished hazelnut. To the outside world and to her husband, she was Elara the homemaker, the orphan who got lucky marrying a rising star, the quiet woman who was content to stay in the background. She picked up her phone from the patio table. It was a secure alert. Alert: VIP guest access revoked. Name: Elara Thorn. Authorized by Julian Thorn. Elara stared at the screen. She didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She didn't throw the phone. Instead, the warmth in her eyes vanished, replaced by a chill that was absolute and terrifying. She swiped the notification away and opened a different app, one that required a fingerprint, a retinal scan, and a 16-digit passcode. The screen turned black, displaying a gold crest. The Aurora Group. The Aurora Group was a venture capital firm so exclusive it didn't have a website. It controlled shipping lines, pharmaceutical patents, and tech startups. 5 years ago, when Julian's first company was drowning in debt, the Aurora Group had swooped in with an anonymous injection of $50 million. Julian thought he had impressed a group of faceless Swiss investors. He never knew that Aurora was Elara's middle name. He never knew that the money he spent, the penthouse he lived in, and the genius reputation he built was all carefully orchestrated by the woman he had just deleted from a guest list because she was too plain. Elara pressed a contact named simply the Wolf. Mrs. Thorn, a gravelly voice answered immediately. It was Sebastian Vane, the head of legal and security for Aurora. We received the deletion log. Is it an error? No, Sebastian, Elara said, her voice changing. Gone was the soft, submissive tone she used with Julian. Her voice was now crisp, commanding, and dripping with authority. It appears my husband believes I am a liability to his image. Shall we cancel the funding for the merger? Sebastian asked. We can pull the plug on the Sterling deal within the hour. Thorn Enterprises will be bankrupt by midnight. No, Elara said, walking into her house. She untied her apron and let it drop to the floor. That's too easy. He wants an image. He wants power. I'm going to give him a lesson in power. She walked up the grand staircase, her footsteps echoing. Is the dress ready? The custom Givenchy. It arrived from Paris this morning, madam. It's in the vault. Good. And the car? The prototype Rolls-Royce is fueled and waiting at the hangar. Driver is on standby. Excellent. Elara reached her bedroom. She looked at the photo on the nightstand, a picture of her and Julian from 5 years ago. He looked adoringly at her then. Now, he looked through her. He had fallen in love with the money and the fame, forgetting who had given him the map to find them. Sebastian, she said into the phone. Yes, ma'am? Change my designation on the Gala guest list. I'm not going as wife of Julian Thorn. How shall I list you? Elara walked into her massive walk-in closet. She pushed aside the row of modest floral dresses Julian liked her to wear. She pressed a hidden panel in the wall. The back of the closet slid open, revealing a climate-controlled room filled with high-fashion couture, diamond sets worth millions, and deeds to properties Julian didn't even know existed. "List me," Ilara whispered, a dangerous smile touching her lips, as the chairman. It's time Julian met his boss. The Vanguard Gala was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The steps were draped in a crimson carpet, flanked by velvet ropes and hundreds of screaming paparazzi. Flashbulbs popped like lightning storms as limousines deposited the world's wealthiest people. Julian Thorne stepped out of a black Mercedes Maybach. He looked impeccable in a Tom Ford tuxedo, but the cameras weren't pointed at him immediately. They were pointed at the woman on his arm. Isabella Ricci was wearing a dress that was barely there, a shimmering silver gown with a slit that went up to her hip and a neckline that plunged dangerously low. She looked like a movie star. She soaked in the attention, blowing kisses to the press. "Julian! Julian!" a reporter from Vanity Fair shouted. "Over here! Who is the stunning lady?" Julian smiled, the smile of a man who thought he had won the lottery. He placed a possessive hand on Isabella's waist. "This is Isabella. She's consulting for Thorne Enterprises on our new branding." "Where is your wife, Ilara?" another reporter yelled. "We heard she was coming." Julian's face didn't twitch. He had practiced the lie in the car. He adopted a look of solemn concern. "Ilara is, unfortunately, under the weather tonight. She sends her regrets. Honestly, this high-paced world isn't really her scene. She prefers the quiet of home." "Is it true the Sterling merger is happening tonight?" "You'll have to wait for the keynote speech," Julian winked, guiding Isabella up the stairs. Inside, the great hall was transformed, towering floral arrangements of white orchids, champagne flowing from crystal fountains, and a live orchestra playing soft jazz. The room was filled with sharks. Julian navigated the room, shaking hands. "Julian, my boy," a booming voice echoed. It was Arthur Sterling, the man Julian needed to impress. Sterling was 60, grey-haired, and built like a linebacker. He was the CEO of Sterling Industries. "Arthur?" Julian shook his hand firmly. "Wonderful evening." Arthur looked at Isabella, then back at Julian. His eyebrows knitted together. "I thought Ilara was coming. I was looking forward to meeting her. My wife is a big fan of her. Charitable work." Julian laughed nervously. "Charitable work? Ilara mostly just gardens?" "No, she's sick. Migraine. Terrible thing. This is Isabella, my, creative director." Arthur Sterling didn't smile. He looked at Isabella, who was checking her makeup in the reflection of a spoon, and then looked at Julian with a strange mix of pity and suspicion. "I see. Well, the board of the Aurora Group is sending a representative tonight to oversee the signing. A special guest. Did you know?" Julian paused. "Aurora. They usually just send lawyers. Who is it?" "I don't know." Arthur lowered his voice. "But rumors say the chairman is coming in person. No one has ever seen him. They say he holds the deed to half of Manhattan." Julian felt a thrill of excitement. If he could impress the chairman of the Aurora Group, his power would be absolute. "I'll make sure to charm him, whoever he is." "I'm sure you will," Arthur said dryly, moving away. Julian grabbed a glass of champagne and turned to Isabella. "Did you hear that? The chairman is coming. This is it, Bella. After tonight, I won't just be rich. I'll be untouchable." Isabella giggled, running a finger down his lapel. "You're already a king, baby. Forget about that boring wife of yours. Tonight is our coronation." Suddenly, the music stopped. The murmur of the crowd died down. The massive oak doors at the top of the grand staircase, which had been closed, began to rumble. The head of security for the gala stepped into the middle of the room with a microphone. He looked nervous. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed, Please clear the center aisle. We have a priority arrival." "Who could it be?" Isabella whispered. "The president?" Julian scoffed. "Probably the chairman of Aurora. Watch this. I'm going to be the first to shake his hand." Julian stepped forward, dragging Isabella with him, positioning himself right at the base of the stairs. He wanted the photo op. The CEO of Thorn Enterprises greeting the mysterious investor. The doors groaned open. But it wasn't an old Swiss banker in a suit who stepped out. The silhouette was feminine. The figure stepped into the light. A collective gasp rippled through the room, so loud it sucked the oxygen out of the air. The woman standing at the top of the stairs was wearing a gown of midnight blue velvet, encrusted with real crushed diamonds that caught the chandelier light like a galaxy. It was regal, imposing, and utterly breathtaking. Her hair, usually tied in a messy bun, was cascading in sleek Hollywood waves. Around her neck sat the heart of the ocean, or a sapphire so large it looked like it. She didn't look down. She looked straight ahead, with eyes like cold steel. Julian dropped his champagne glass. It shattered on the floor, spraying shards over Isabella's shoes, but neither of them noticed. Julian squinted. His brain couldn't process what he was seeing. It looked like Ilara, but it couldn't be. Ilara was at home. Ilara was plain. Ilara was deleted. The woman began to descend the stairs. Every step was calculated. Every movement screamed power. The master of ceremonies announced, his voice trembling slightly, "Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the founder and chairman of the Aurora Group, Mrs. Ilara Vance Thorn." The silence that followed was deafening. Julian felt his knees buckle. Isabella looked at him, eyes wide. "I thought you said she was a housewife." Ilara reached the bottom of the stairs. She stopped 3 feet in front of Julian. She didn't look at him. She looked through him, directly at Arthur Sterling, who was bowing his head in respect. Then, slowly, she turned her gaze to her husband. "Hello, Julian," she said. Her voice was amplified by the acoustics of the room, smooth and deadly. "I believe there was a mistake with the guest list. You seem to have erased me. So I decided to buy the venue." The flashbulbs were blinding, but Julian felt like he was standing in pitch darkness. The air in the grand hall had grown thick, suffocating. He looked at Ilara. No, this wasn't Ilara. This was a stranger wearing his wife's face. The Ilara he knew wore cotton pajamas and smelled of vanilla. This woman smelled of oud wood and cold, hard cash. She stood taller, her posture regal, her chin tilted up as if the world were waiting for her permission to spin. "Buy the venue?" Julian stammered, his confident CEO voice reduced to a pathetic squeak. "Ilara, what are you talking about? You're hallucinating. You need to go home. You're embarrassing yourself." He reached out to grab her arm, a reflex of control he had used 1,000 times before. Before his fingers could graze the velvet of her gown, a massive hand intercepted his wrist. It was Sebastian Vane, the man Julian thought was just a faceless lawyer for the Aurora Group. In person, Sebastian was 6'4", with a scar running through his eyebrow and a grip like a hydraulic press. "I wouldn't touch the chairman if I were you, Mr. Thorn," Sebastian growled, his voice low enough that only they could hear, but menacing enough to make Julian flinch. Isabella Ricci, sensing her moment in the spotlight was fading, stepped forward. She flipped her hair, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Oh, please, this is ridiculous. Julian, tell your little housewife to go back to her gardening. This is a business gala, not a costume party. Who does she think she is? Crashing our night." Ilara finally shifted her gaze to Isabella. She didn't look angry. She didn't look jealous. She looked at Isabella the way a scientist looks at a bacteria sample in a petri dish, mildly interesting, but ultimately insignificant. "Isabella Ricci," Ilara said, her voice calm. "Former runway model for Versace. Dropped in 2021 for unprofessional conduct. Currently barely making rent on a studio apartment in Soho, which, incidentally, is owned by a subsidiary of the Aurora Group." Isabella's jaw dropped. "How do you—" "I know everything, my dear," Ilara said, stepping closer. "I know you've been charging your Uber rides to Julian's corporate card. I know you're wearing a loner dress that has to be returned by 9 a.m. tomorrow. And I know you think you've caught a big fish." Ilara glanced at Julian, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. "But you didn't catch a whale, Isabella. You caught a remora, a parasite attached to a much larger host." Ilara turned her back on them, facing the crowd of stunned billionaires. "Arthur," she said, extending a hand to Arthur Sterling. Arthur Sterling, the titan of industry, didn't hesitate. He took her hand and kissed the ring, a sapphire signet ring with the Aurora crest. "Madam Chairman, I had heard rumors the Aurora Group was led by a woman, but I never suspected. Well, it is an honor." "The honor is mine, Arthur," Ilara smiled, a dazzling professional smile that Julian had never seen. "I apologize for the delay. My husband seemed to have misplaced my invitation. Shall we proceed to the main table? We have a merger to discuss." But I'm the keynote speaker," Julian shouted, desperation clawing at his throat. "This is my company, Thorn Enterprises." Ilara paused. She turned her head slightly over her shoulder. "Is it Julian?" she asked softly. "Who paid off your initial loans? Aurora. Who bought the patents for your tech? Aurora. Who covers the insurance policies? Aurora. You are the face, Julian. A handsome face, I'll admit. But I am the spine. And tonight, I think it's time for a spinal tap." She walked away, arm in arm with Arthur Sterling, the crowd parting for her like the Red Sea. Julian was left standing at the foot of the stairs, the shards of his broken champagne glass crunching under his polished shoes. The dinner service was an exercise in torture for Julian. Usually he sat at the head of the table, the center of attention. Tonight, the seating chart had been digitally rearranged in real time. Ilara sat at the head of the platinum table, flanked by Arthur Sterling and the Senator of New York. Julian found his name card at table 42. It was near the kitchen doors. Isabella had vanished. The moment she realized Julian wasn't the power player, she had slipped away into the crowd, likely looking for a new target. Julian was alone. He watched from across the room as Ilara laughed at something Arthur said. She looked radiant. She was drinking vintage Pinot Noir, a wine Julian had told her was too complex for her palate just last week. She was speaking fluent French to the diplomat on her left. Julian didn't even know she spoke French. He couldn't take it anymore. Fueled by humiliation and 3 glasses of whiskey, Julian stood up and marched across the room. The murmuring stopped as he approached the head table. "Enough!" Julian slammed his hand down on the white tablecloth, rattling the silverware. "Stop the act, Ilara. You've had your fun. You've embarrassed me. Now, sign the papers with Arthur so I can go home." Arthur Sterling looked up, unimpressed. "Julian, we are in the middle of a discussion about global supply chains, something you struggled to explain in our last meeting." "She doesn't know anything about supply chains," Julian spat, pointing a shaking finger at his wife. "She sits at home and plants hydrangeas. I built this company. Me! I worked 18-hour days." Ilara set her wine glass down. The sound of the glass touching the table echoed in the silent hall. "You worked 18-hour days?" Ilara asked quietly. "Let's clarify that, shall we? You spent 4 hours in the office. You spent 3 hours at lunch. You spent 2 hours at the gym. And you spent the rest of the time entertaining clients like Isabella. That's a lie, is it? Ilara gestured to the massive screen behind the stage, usually reserved for the keynote presentation. She pressed a button on a small remote concealed in her hand. The screen flickered to life. It wasn't a PowerPoint about profits. It was a series of financial documents. These, Ilara narrated, her voice projecting clearly, are the unauthorized withdrawals from the Thorn Enterprises R&D Fund. $2 million transferred to an offshore account in the Caymans. $1 million spent on a consulting fee to a shell company owned by Miss Ricci. The crowd gasped. This was corporate embezzlement. This was prison time. And this, Ilara clicked the button again. A video played. It was security footage from Julian's office. The audio was crisp. Julian's voice on the recording. I don't care about the safety protocols. Just bypass the regulations. If the battery explodes, we'll blame the supplier. I need the stock price to hit $400 by the Gala so I can cash out and divorce Ilara. She's dead weight. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a grave. Julian stared at the screen, his face draining of color. He looked like a ghost. Where? How did you get that? I own the building, Julian, Ilara said, standing up. She towered over him, even though he was taller. Her presence was mountainous. I own the servers. I own the cameras. I own the very chair you sit in. Did you really think you could steal from my company, plan to leave me destitute, and erase me from my own life without me noticing? She leaned in close, her voice a whisper that screamed. I watered you like a plant, Julian. I gave you sunlight. I gave you soil. But you turned out to be a weed. And you know what I do to weeds? I pluck them out, Ilara finished. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the acoustic perfection of the Metropolitan Museum's Grand Hall, it struck with the force of a gavel. The room, filled with the titans of industry, was frozen in a tableau of shock. Waiters stopped pouring wine. The string quartet, sensing the violence in the air, had lowered their bows. Julian Thorn stood by the head table, his face a mask of fracturing plaster. He looked at the screen where his secret offshore accounts were still displayed in high definition, red numbers glowing like fresh wounds. He looked at Arthur Sterling, whose face had turned a shade of purple, usually reserved for bruised fruit. Then he looked at Ilara. For a moment, the old Julian resurfaced, the master manipulator who had charmed investors and seduced the press for a decade. He forced a laugh. It was a wet, jagged sound that grated on the nerves. This, Julian gestured wildly at the screen, turning to face the crowd. This is incredible theater. Bravo, Ilara. Really, I'm impressed. He walked toward Arthur Sterling, spreading his hands in a gesture of camaraderie. Arthur, gentlemen, surely you see what this is. It's a deep fake, AI generation. My wife has evidently hired some very expensive hackers to create a smear campaign because she's emotional. We're going through a rough patch at home. She's hysterical. He leaned in closer to the microphone, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You know how women get when they feel neglected. They invent stories. They seek attention. I built Thorn Enterprises from a garage. Do you really think I would jeopardize my life's work for pocket change? A murmur went through the crowd. It was the sound of doubt. Julian was charismatic. He was one of them. For a terrifying second, it seemed his gaslighting might work. Ilara didn't flinch. She didn't scream. She simply tapped the tablet she was holding. Pocket change? Ilara asked, her voice cutting through his performance. Let's talk about the battery protocol, Julian. On the massive screen behind her, the financial documents vanished. They were replaced by a grainy, black and white video feed. The timestamp was from 3 weeks ago. The location, the executive lounge of the Ritz-Carlton. Julian froze. His blood ran cold. He remembered that night. He had been drinking with the CFO of a rival tech firm, bragging. The video played. The audio was crystal clear. Julian, on screen, holding a scotch. The engineers are whining about the thermal runaway on the new Model X phone battery. They say if it charges for more than 4 hours, there's a 5% chance it catches fire. Rival CFO, off-screen. Jesus, Julian. You're going to delay the launch? Julian, laughing, taking a sip. Delay? And miss the Q4 bonus? Hell no, we ship it. If a few phones melt, we blame the user. We call it improper charging habits. I've already drafted the press release. As long as the stock hits $400 by the Gala, I'm cashing out anyway. I'll be divorced and living in Monaco before the first lawsuit hits. The video ended. The screen went black. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of shock anymore. It was the silence of absolute, unadulterated disgust. Arthur Sterling stood up slowly. He was a man who had ruthlessly acquired companies, a man who was no stranger to corporate warfare. But he was also a man who prided himself on honor. He looked at Julian as if he were looking at something he had scraped off his shoe. You were going to let them burn, Arthur said, his voice trembling with rage. My granddaughter uses a Thorn phone. You were going to let it explode in her hands for a quarterly bonus. Arthur, wait, that's out of context, Julian stammered, backing away as the older man advanced. It was locker room talk. It was a joke. Security, Arthur roared, slamming his fist onto the table. Get this criminal out of my sight before I forget I'm a civilized man. 2 uniformed guards stepped forward from the shadows, but Alara raised her hand. They stopped instantly. She was the commander-in-chief tonight. Not yet, Alara said softly. She walked around the table, the train of her midnight blue gown sweeping across the floor. She approached Julian. He was trembling now, sweat beading on his forehead, ruining his makeup. You called me hysterical, Julian, Alara said, standing toe-to-toe with him. You said I was emotional. But look at the facts. I saved the company you tried to destroy. I protected the customers you viewed as collateral damage. I am the only reason you aren't already in handcuffs. Alara, please. Julian's voice cracked, shifting instantly from arrogance to pathetic begging. He grabbed her hand, his palms clammy. Alara, baby, listen to me. I was drunk. I didn't mean it. The stress, the pressure, it broke me. You know me. I'm your husband. We're a team. Remember the cottage? Remember our vows? He fell to his knees, sobbing theatrically, clutching the fabric of her dress. I'll fix it. I'll fire Isabella. I'll donate the money. Just don't let them take me. Don't ruin me. I love you, Alara. I've always loved you. The crowd watched, mesmerized. It was a pathetic display. The king of tech was on his knees, weeping into velvet. Alara looked down at him. Her face was unreadable. For a fleeting second, a memory flashed in her mind. Julian bringing her soup when she had the flu, years ago. Julian holding her hand at her mother's funeral. But then, she looked at the screen again. She saw the timestamp. 3 weeks ago. While he was planning to let phones explode, she had been planning his birthday party. She gently, but firmly, pulled her dress from his grip. You don't love me, Julian, she said, her voice filled with a profound, final sadness. You love the way I make you look. You love the safety net I provide. But you cut the net. She turned to Sebastian Vane, the imposing head of security who had been waiting in the wings like a gargoyle. Mr. Vane, Yes, Madam Chairman? Remove him. Sebastian stepped forward, grabbing Julian by the upper arm. It wasn't a gentle escort. It was a vice grip. Julian yelped. No, get off me! I'm the CEO! You work for me! Julian screamed, thrashing as Sebastian and another guard dragged him backward toward the grand exit. Elara, tell them to stop. I own this company. I own 51%. Elara picked up the microphone from the podium. She didn't shout. She spoke clearly, addressing his retreating figure. Actually, Julian, she said, Clause 14, Section B of the Founding Charter. In the event of gross negligence or criminal intent by the CEO, the primary investor retains the right to invoke the clean slate protocol. The what? Julian screamed, digging his heels into the red carpet. Sebastian, Elara commanded. Execute protocol. Sebastian tapped his earpiece. Execute. At that exact moment, Julian's phone, which was in the breast pocket of his tuxedo, began to vibrate violently. It wasn't just a call. It was a cascade of notifications. Julian managed to rip his arm free for 1 second. He pulled out his phone, desperate to call his lawyer. He stared at the screen. Notification. Face ID not recognized. Notification. Apple Pay. Card declined. Notification. American Express. Account closed by issuer. Notification. Tesla key. Access revoked. Notification. Penthouse smart lock. User. Julian. Deleted. What are you doing? Julian shrieked, staring at the device as it essentially turned into a brick in his hands. My accounts! My car! Everything you have, Elara said, her voice echoing through the hall, was leased in the company's name. The car, the apartment, the credit cards, even the phone in your hand. Julian looked up, terror in his eyes. But my money, my personal savings. Your personal savings were transferred to the Cayman Islands, Elara reminded him, which, thanks to the Patriot Act and the evidence of fraud I just uploaded to the FBI server 3 minutes ago, have been frozen pending a federal investigation. The color drained from Julian's face so completely he looked like a corpse. You called the feds? I didn't have to call them, Elara said, gesturing to the back of the room. They were on the guest list. I just undeleted them. At the back of the hall, 4 men in windbreakers with FBI printed on the back stepped forward. They had been waiting for the evidence to be public. Julian's legs gave out. He went limp. The security guards didn't struggle anymore. They simply dragged him. As he was hauled past the tables of his former peers, people he had laughed with, drank with, plotted with, they turned their backs, one by one. It was a wave of rejection. No one looked at him. He was already a ghost. At the massive oak doors, Julian found one last reserve of venom. He twisted his neck, his face contorted into a mask of pure hatred. You're nothing without me, he screamed, his voice cracking, raw and ugly. You can't run this. You're just a gardener. You're just a housewife. You'll burn this company to the ground in a week. Elara stood alone on the stage. The spotlight hit her, making the diamonds on her neck blaze like stars. She looked at the man she had wasted 10 years on. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked powerful. I am not a housewife, Julian, she said into the microphone, her voice calm, resonant, and final. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. I am the house, and the house always wins. The heavy doors slammed shut, cutting off Julian's final scream. For 3 seconds, there was silence. Then Arthur Sterling began to clap. It was a slow, rhythmic clap. Then the senator joined in. Then the models. Then the waitstaff. Within moments, the entire Metropolitan Museum of Art was shaking with thunderous applause. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar of approval. Elara didn't smile. She didn't bow. She simply nodded to Marcus, her assistant. "Clean up this mess," she whispered, gesturing to the shattered champagne glass on the floor where Julian had stood. "And serve the dessert. I believe we have a merger to sign." 6 months later. The autumn rain in Manhattan was relentless, turning the city into a blur of grey steel and neon lights. But inside the penthouse office of the newly christened Aurora Thorn Industries, the atmosphere was warm, vibrant, and ruthlessly efficient. Elara Thorn sat behind a desk that was more of a command station than a piece of furniture. It was carved from a single slab of white marble, cool to the touch, devoid of the clutter that had once plagued Julian's workspace. Gone were the ego-stroking magazine covers and the useless accolades. In their place were holographic schematics of a new sustainable energy grid and a single framed photograph of a small cottage in Connecticut, a reminder of where she found her peace. "Madame CEO," Marcus's voice came through the intercom. The title still sent a small, satisfying electric current through Elara's spine. Marcus had flourished in the last half-year. No longer the terrified assistant fetching coffee, he was now the vice president of operations, wearing a suit that actually fit, and walking with the confidence of a man who knew his job was secure. "Yes, Marcus," Elara replied, swiping a profit projection off her screen. "The legal team is here, and he has arrived." Elara paused. Her hand hovered over the digital stylus. She had known this day was coming, the finalization of the divorce proceedings. It was a formality, really. The prenuptial agreement, combined with the overwhelming evidence of Julian's corporate embezzlement and infidelity, meant there was very little to discuss. But Julian, in a last-ditch effort to salvage his ego, had demanded an in-person meeting to sign the final dissolution of partnership papers. "Send them in," Elara said, her voice steady. "And Marcus?" "Yes, ma'am?" "Have security on standby. Not in the room, just outside. I don't want a scene, but I won't tolerate a circus." "Understood. They are on their way up." Elara stood and walked to the window. The view was the same one Julian had looked out of the night he deleted her name. But the city looked different now. It didn't look like a kingdom to be conquered. It looked like a complex machine that she was finally running correctly. Since taking over, stock prices had surged 45%. The Julian Thorn innovation that the media used to praise turned out to be a bottleneck. Without his micromanagement and fear-mongering, the engineers were finally free to create. The elevator doors chimed. Elara turned. Her lawyer, a sharp-witted woman named Catherine Pierce, who was known in legal circles as the Guillotine, entered first. And then, trailing behind her like a ghost, haunting his own grave, came Julian. The transformation was shocking, even to Elara. 6 months ago, Julian Thorn had been the picture of vitality. He had glowed with the sheen of expensive moisturizers, personal trainers, and the arrogance of a man who had never heard the word no. The man standing before her now looked hollowed out. His suit was off the rack, ill-fitting at the shoulders and slightly frayed at the cuff. His hair, once perfectly coiffed, was thinning and dull. But it was his eyes that told the real story. The fire was gone. In its place was a muddy mixture of resentment, exhaustion, and a desperate, clawing hope. "Elara," Julian said. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat, trying to summon the ghost of his old authority. "You changed the decor. It's a bit cold, isn't it?" "It's efficient," Elara said, not inviting him to sit. "Sit down, Julian. Let's get this over with. I have a board meeting in 20 minutes. Julian flinched at the dismissal. He sat in the chair opposite her, a chair that was noticeably lower than hers. A subtle psychological tactic Elara had implemented for all negotiations. Catherine Pierce slid a thick black folder across the marble desk. Mr. Thorne, as per the mediation, this is the final decree. You are surrendering all claims to Thorne Enterprises, the Connecticut estate, and the Manhattan penthouse. In exchange, Mrs. Thorne has graciously agreed to absorb the outstanding legal fees for your embezzlement trial, provided you plead no contest and accept the probation deal. Julian stared at the papers. His hands were shaking. I built this, he whispered, looking around the room. I picked out those sconces. I chose the carpet in the hallway. You chose the decor, Julian, Ilara corrected him, gently but firmly. I paid for it. There is a difference. Julian looked up, his eyes wet. Is that all I was to you? An investment? A project? Ilara sighed. She walked around the desk, leaning against the edge, looking down at him. No, Julian. You were my husband. I loved you. I loved you enough to hide my light so yours wouldn't be shadowed. I loved you enough to let you take credit for my strategies. I loved you enough to let you believe you were the king, while I quietly laid every brick of the castle. She crossed her arms. But you didn't want a partner. You wanted a prop. And when you thought the prop wasn't shiny enough for your big night, you tried to throw it in the trash. You didn't realize that without the prop, the whole stage collapses. I made a mistake, Julian burst out, the desperation finally breaking through. One mistake. I was stressed. Isabella meant nothing. She was just a distraction. I can change, Ilara. Look at me. I've lost everything. Isn't that punishment enough? Take me back. Not as CEO, just give me a job. I can work in sales. I can consult. Please, I'm drowning out there. He leaned forward, his face pale. Do you know where I'm working? A used car lot in Queens, Ilara. Queens. I'm selling Civics to college kids who don't even know who I am. Last week, a customer threw a coffee at me because the transmission failed. Me? Julian Thorne? Ilara looked at him, and for a moment, she searched her heart for pity. She looked for that familiar tug of guilt that had controlled her for a decade. She found nothing. It wasn't that she was cruel. It was just that she had finally grown up. She realized that saving Julian from the consequences of his actions wasn't love, it was enabling. You're good at sales, Julian, she said objectively. You sold me a dream for 10 years that turned out to be a lemon. You'll do fine in Queens. Julian's face hardened. The sorrow evaporated, replaced by a flash of the old, nasty malice. You think you've won, don't you? You think you're some feminist icon. But you'll always be the woman who couldn't keep her husband happy. You'll be alone in this tower. Cold and alone. Ilara smiled. It wasn't a bitter smile. It was the smile of someone who had just realized the weather had cleared. Catherine, Ilara said to her lawyer. Does he have a pen? Catherine handed Julian a pen. He gripped it like a dagger, stared at the signature line, and for a second, he hesitated. He looked at the office one last time. He looked at the life he had incinerated, because he was too insecure to share the spotlight. He signed. The scratching of the pen on paper was the loudest sound in the room. Done! Julian slammed the pen down. He stood up, smoothing his cheap jacket. I'm leaving. I hope you choke on your money, Ilara. Goodbye, Julian, Ilara said, turning her back to him to look out the window again. She heard his footsteps retreat. She heard the heavy oak door open and close. And then, silence. But it wasn't a lonely silence. It was a peaceful one. Catherine, Ilara said without turning around. Did the transfer go through? Yes, Madam Chairman. The moment he signed, the final trust fund payment was authorized. He doesn't know it yet, but you put $200,000 in an account for him. Why? After everything he said? Ilara watched the rain streak against the glass. Because I'm not him. I don't destroy people just because I can. That money will keep him off the street, but it won't buy him a way back in. It's a severance package for a failed employee. Nothing more. Catherine chuckled, gathering her files. You're a better woman than I am, Ilara. I would have let him starve. I'm not better, Ilara whispered to the glass. I'm just finished. Later that afternoon, the rain had stopped, leaving the city scrubbed clean and glistening under a breaking sun. Ilara stepped out of the lobby of Aurora Thorne Tower. Your car is ready, madame, the valet said, holding open the door of the silver Rolls-Royce. No, thank you, James, Ilara said, adjusting her scarf. I think I'll walk today. Walk, ma'am, but the paparazzi. Let them snap their pictures, Ilara said, putting on her sunglasses. I have nothing to hide. She walked onto the sidewalk, merging into the flow of New York City. For years she had walked with her head down, trying to avoid being noticed, trying not to embarrass Julian. Today, she walked with a stride that commanded space. She passed a newsstand. The cover of Business Weekly featured her face, not a side profile, not a blurry paparazzi shot, but a studio portrait she had commissioned. The headline read, The Silent Architect Speaks, How Ilara Thorne Saved a $1 billion Empire. She paused for a moment, looking at it. Beside the stack of magazines was a tabloid. The headline there was smaller, tucked in the corner. Fallen tech bro Julian Thorne. Spotted eating sandwich on curb. Ilara felt a vibration in her pocket. She pulled out her phone. It was a text from Arthur Sterling. Arthur, the European delegation is asking if you can fly to Paris next week for the summit. They want to discuss the clean energy patent. Also, my wife wants to know if you'd like to join us for dinner tonight. No business, just wine. Ilara typed back, Tell the delegation I'll be there. And tell your wife to open the good Cabernet. I'm bringing dessert. She put the phone away and turned a corner, entering Central Park. The noise of the city faded, replaced by the rustle of leaves. She made her way to the conservatory garden. 6 months ago, she had been a woman defined by who she was married to. She had been Julian's wife, a deletion on a guest list, an inconvenience. She stopped in front of a massive bed of blooming hydrangeas, blue, purple, and pink, exploding in a riot of color. She reached out and touched a petal. It was delicate, yet resilient. It had survived the winter to bloom in the sun. A young girl, maybe 20 years old, was sitting on a bench nearby, sketching the flowers. She looked up and saw Ilara. Her eyes went wide. Excuse me? The girl stammered. Are you Ilara Thorne? Ilara looked down, surprised. I am. The girl scrambled to stand up, dropping her sketchbook. Oh my God, I saw your speech at the shareholders' meeting online, the one about owning your own value. I just wanted to say, thank you. My boyfriend told me my art was a waste of time, that I should just help him with his startup. I broke up with him this morning because of you. Ilara felt a lump form in her throat. She looked at the girl, so young, so full of potential, standing on the precipice of the same mistake Ilara had made. What is your name? Ilara asked. Sophie. Ilara reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. It was heavy, cream-colored cardstock with gold embossing. Sophie, Ilara said, handing her the card. When you finish your portfolio, call this number. Aurora Thorne is looking for creative consultants for our new branding. We need people who understand that art isn't a waste of time. It's the soul of innovation. Sophie stared at the card, her hands trembling. Thank you. Thank you so much. "Don't thank me," Ilara smiled, and this time the smile reached her eyes, lighting them up like the diamonds she now wore openly. "Just promise me one thing." "Anything," Sophie breathed. "Never let anyone delete you from your own story. If they try to erase you, you pick up the pen and you write them out of the next chapter." Ilara turned and walked away down the winding path, the afternoon sun casting a long, strong shadow in front of her. She wasn't going home to an empty house. She was going home to a life that was finally, completely, and unapologetically full. Julian thought power came from a title, a suit, and a guest list. He learned the hard way that real power isn't loud. It doesn't need to shout to be heard. Real power is the quiet confidence of the person who holds the keys to the castle while everyone else is just renting a room. Ilara Thorne showed the world that you should never mistake silence for weakness, and you should never, ever delete the person who built your throne. What would you have done if you were Ilara? Would you have taken him back when he begged on his knees, or did he get exactly what he deserved? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of sweet revenge and justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. We have a shocking new drama coming tomorrow that involves a cheating groom and a secret microphone. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and remember, be careful who you underestimate. They say in sickness and in health. But for Adrian Vance, those were just words on a contract he was ready to shred. While his wife, Eleanor, lay shivering on the floor, coughing until her vision blurred, Adrian wasn't calling an ambulance. He was silencing his phone to listen to the laughter of another woman. He thought Elena was a burden, a fading flower in his perfect garden. He thought he could discard her and replace her with someone younger, brighter, and healthier. But Adrian Vance forgot one thing. A woman who survives the fires of hell comes back not as ash, but as a diamond. And by the time he realized his mistake, she wasn't just surviving. She was standing next to the one man Adrian feared the most. The grand clock in the hallway of the Vance estate ticked loudly, each second echoing like a hammer against a nail. It was 11:45 p.m. Elena Vance sat at the head of a mahogany dining table that stretched out long enough to seat 20 people. Tonight, it was set for two. 2 crystal wine glasses, 2 bone china plates rimmed with gold, and a centerpiece of white lilies, Adrian's favorite, though he likely wouldn't remember that. The food, a slow-roasted duck prepared by their private chef hours ago, was now cold and congealed under the silver serving dome. Elena shivered, pulling her cashmere shawl tighter around her thin shoulders. The central heating was set to 75 degrees, yet the cold seemed to radiate from her bones outward. Elena looked up. It was Mrs. Higgins, their housekeeper for the last 5 years. The older woman's face was pinched with worry. "Mr. Vance, he hasn't called?" Elena offered a weak, pale smile. "He's busy, Mrs. Higgins. The merger with Oakhaven Tech is in its final stages. He loses track of time." "It is your 5th anniversary, Mrs. Vance," Mrs. Higgins said softly, stepping closer to pour warm tea into Eleanor's empty wine glass. Even a busy man has a calendar. Eleanor didn't reply. She couldn't defend him anymore, not when the evidence was carved into the hollows of her cheeks. 6 months ago, Elena had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disorder affecting her blood platelets. It drained her energy, left her bruised at the slightest touch, and required aggressive, exhausting treatments. Before the sickness, she had been Adrian's partner in every sense. They had built Vance Global together. She was the one who charmed the investors, who proofread the contracts, who smoothed over Adrian's jagged edges. But as her health declined, so did his affection. He didn't look at her with love anymore. He looked at her like she was a broken appliance he couldn't figure out how to return. The sound of the heavy oak front door unlocking shattered the silence. Elena straightened her spine, wincing at the ache in her joints. "He's here." Adrian Vance walked into the dining room. He was a striking man, tall, with hair the color of midnight and eyes like cold steel. He was wearing a bespoke Italian suit that cost more than most people's cars. He didn't look tired. He looked exhilarated, and he smelled, distinctly, of vanilla and expensive gin. He stopped, loosening his tie, and looked at the table. He didn't look at Elena. He looked at the cold food. "Why is the food still out?" Adrian asked, his voice devoid of warmth. "It smells stale." Elena stood up, using the table for support. "Happy anniversary, Adrian." Adrian paused, his hand halfway to unbuttoning his collar. He looked at her then, really looked at her. But there was no softness. His gaze swept over her pale skin, the dark circles under her eyes, the way her dress hung loosely on her frame. "Right," he said, checking his Rolex. "The 5th. I forgot." "I waited," Elena whispered. "I was working, Elena. Someone has to keep this empire running, since you decided to retire to the sickbed permanently." The cruelty of the remark was like a physical slap. "I didn't decide to get sick, Adrian. The doctors say if the treatment works—" If, Adrian snapped, walking to the sideboard to pour himself a scotch. "I hear if every day. I come home to a hospital ward, Elena. It's depressing. Do you know how hard it is to close a billion-dollar deal and come home to this?" He gestured vaguely at her, as if her existence was the inconvenience. "I'm sorry my dying is inconveniencing your schedule," Elena said, a spark of her old fire igniting. Adrian slammed the glass down. "Don't be dramatic. You aren't dying, you're just weak. You've let yourself go. Look at you." He pulled a velvet box from his pocket. For a second, Elena's heart skipped. He had remembered. He had bought a gift. He tossed it onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped near the cold duck. "Take it," he said. "Happy anniversary." Elena opened the box with trembling fingers. Inside was a pair of diamond stud earrings. They were beautiful, objectively. But Elena didn't have pierced ears. She never had. Adrian knew this, or at least the Adrian of 5 years ago knew this. I can't wear these, Adrian," she said softly. "Why not? They're 5 carats. My ears aren't pierced. Because of the clotting disorder, the doctor said I can't risk infection right now." Adrian rolled his eyes, a gesture of pure exhaustion. "God, everything is a production with you. Give them to Mrs. Higgins, then. I'm going to shower. Sleep in the guest room tonight, Elena. Your coughing kept me up last night, and I have a meeting with Julian Thorne tomorrow. I need to be sharp." He walked out, leaving her alone with the diamonds and the cold food. As he passed her, the scent of vanilla hit her again. Stronger this time. It wasn't a perfume she owned. Elena closed the velvet box. A single tear escaped, hot and stinging against her cold cheek. She realized then that the earrings weren't a mistake. They were a regift, a careless afterthought purchased for someone else, or perhaps rejected by someone else. The next morning, the sun shone brightly over the city, but the atmosphere inside the Vance penthouse remained grey. Adrian had left before Elena woke up. She sat in the kitchen, staring at her schedule of medications. A blue pill for the pain, a white one for the inflammation, A monthly injection due today at the clinic. She picked up her phone. She needed a ride to the clinic. Usually the driver took her, but Adrian had texted earlier. Took the driver. Take an Uber. Elena sighed and opened her banking app to transfer some funds for the ride and the copay. Her breath hitched. The screen flashed red. Access denied. She tried again. Account frozen. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in her chest. She dialed Adrian. It went straight to voicemail. She dialed his assistant, Jessica. Vance Global, Jessica speaking. Jessica, it's Elena. My card isn't working. I need to get to the clinic. There was an awkward pause on the line. Oh, Mrs. Vance. Mr. Vance gave instructions this morning to restructure the personal accounts. He said spending was getting out of hand and he needed to approve all transactions personally. He cut me off, Elena asked, her voice trembling. Jessica, I need my medication. It costs $4,000 a dose. I can't authorize that, Ma'am. Mr. Vance is in a lunch meeting at Le Jardin. Maybe you can go there and ask him. Le Jardin, the most exclusive French restaurant in the city. It was across town. Elena felt a wave of dizziness. She checked her purse. She had $40 in cash, enough for a cab to the restaurant, but not enough to get back. Thank you, Jessica, she whispered, and hung up. She dressed in the most professional outfit she could manage, a cream suit that used to fit perfectly, but now required a belt to stay up. She applied blush to hide the pallor of her skin. She wouldn't go to him as a beggar. She would go as his wife. The cab ride was nauseating. When Eleanor arrived at Le Jardin, the maître d', a man named Henri, who had known the Vances for years, looked at her with pity. Mrs. Vance, Henri said, blocking her path slightly. Perhaps this isn't a good time. I need to speak to my husband, Henri. It's a medical emergency. He is dining in a private booth. Elena pushed past him. Her desperation gave her a momentary burst of adrenaline. She walked through the plush, carpeted dining room, scanning the booths. She found him in the corner, near the patio windows. Adrian was laughing. His head was thrown back, his smile wide and genuine, a smile Eleanor hadn't seen in 2 years. Sitting across from him was a woman. She was everything Eleanor currently was not. Chloe Sinclair. Eleanor knew her. Chloe was the new VP of marketing at Vance Global. 26 years old, glowing skin, vibrant red lipstick, and a laugh that sounded like wind chimes. She was wearing a sleeveless dress that showed off her tanned, healthy arms. And on her ears, Elena froze. The diamond studs, the ones Adrian had tossed on the table last night. Chloe was wearing them. Adrian reached across the table and took Chloe's hand. You're the only one who understands the vision, Chloe. Elena, she's stuck in the past. She's dead weight. Don't say that, Adrian, Chloe purred, though her eyes danced with triumph. She's sick. It's sad. It's not just sickness. She's given up. I need someone who can run at my pace. Someone like you. Elena felt the world tilt. The sounds of the restaurant, clinking silverware, low chatter, blurred into a high-pitched ring in her ears. She gripped the back of a nearby chair to steady herself. Adrian, she said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but in the sudden silence of the booth, it sounded like a scream. Adrian's head snapped up. His face went from joy to shock, and then instantly to cold fury. He snatched his hand away from Chloe's, but the damage was done. What are you doing here? He hissed, standing up. I told you I was in a meeting. Is this the meeting? Elena gestured to Chloe, then pointed a shaking finger at the earrings. With my anniversary gift? Chloe touched her earlobe, feigning innocence. Oh, these? Adrian said they were just a thank you for the quarterly report. Go home, Elena, Adrian growled, stepping out of the booth to block her from the other diner's view. You're making a scene. You look like a ghost. You froze my accounts, Adrian. I can't get my treatment. We'll discuss finances at home, not here. I need the medicine now. I missed my appointment, Elena cried out. Adrian grabbed her arm. His grip was too tight. I said, go home. Stop acting like a charity case. I'll transfer the money tonight. Now get out before you embarrass me further. He shoved her. It wasn't a violent throw, but in her weakened state, it was enough. Elena stumbled back. Her heel caught on the carpet. She fell. It wasn't a graceful fall. She hit the floor hard, her hip slamming against the wood. A gasp went through the restaurant. Oh my God, Chloe said, not moving to help. She really is unstable. Elena looked up from the floor. She waited for Adrian to offer a hand. She waited for the husband who had vowed to protect her to help her up. Adrian stood over her, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked down with pure disgust. Get up, Elena, he whispered harshly. You are pathetic. Elena didn't remember leaving the restaurant. She remembered Henri, the maitre d', helping her up with tears in his eyes. She remembered walking out the front door into the sudden downpour of rain. She had no money for a cab back. The $40 had been spent getting here. She walked. The rain soaked through her cream suit instantly, plastering the expensive fabric to her shivering skin. She walked aimlessly. The image of Chloe wearing those diamonds burning in her mind. Dead weight. That's what he called her. Her body began to shut down. The stress, combined with the mist injection, was triggering a crisis. Her joints locked up. Her vision began to tunnel. She was crossing a busy intersection near the financial district when her legs simply refused to move another step. I'm going to die here, she thought. And Adrian won't even care. He'll just be relieved he doesn't have to file the divorce papers. The traffic light turned green. A black SUV screeched to a halt inches from her legs. A horn blared. Elena swayed. The world went black, and she crumpled onto the wet asphalt. Inside the black SUV, Julian Thorne looked up from his tablet. What happened? Why did we stop? Someone collapsed in the road, sir, his driver said. Looks like a junkie. Julian frowned. He was a man of precision, the CEO of Thorne Enterprises, and Adrian Vance's fiercest rival. He didn't have time for delays. But something about the figure on the ground, the cream suit, the way the dark hair fanned out against the pavement. Wait, Julian said. He opened the door and stepped out into the rain, ignoring his driver's protests. He walked toward the crumpled figure. He knelt down and brushed the wet hair away from the woman's face. His breath caught in his throat. Elena? He hadn't seen her in 3 years. Not since the charity gala where she had outsmarted him on a real estate deal. Back then, she was vibrant, sharp, a force of nature. The woman lying in the mud was a shadow. Her cheekbones were protruding, her skin translucent. She groaned, her eyes fluttering open. She looked at him, but he doubted she recognized him. Adrian, she whispered, delirious. Please. Julian's jaw tightened. He knew the rumors. Everyone in the business world knew Adrian was stepping out with his marketing VP. Everyone knew Adrian was neglecting his wife. But seeing the reality of it, seeing Elena Vance left to die in the street like a stray dog, ignited a fury in Julian that he hadn't felt in decades. He scooped her up in his arms. She felt terrifyingly light, like a bird made of hollow bones. "Driver!" Julian roared, carrying her toward the car. "Call Dr. Aris. Tell him to meet us at my private clinic. Now." "But sir, The meeting with the Japanese investors. Cancel it, Julian snapped, sliding into the back seat with Eleanor cradled against his chest. He pulled off his heavy wool coat and wrapped it around her shivering body. Eleanor's head lulled against his shoulder. She was freezing cold. "You're safe," Julian whispered into her hair, his voice surprisingly gentle. "I've got you." He looked out the window at the rainy skyline of the city Adrian Vance thought he owned. Julian pulled out his phone and sent a text to his head of security. "Find out everything about Adrian Vance's finances, and find out exactly what he's been doing while his wife was dying. I want to bury him." As the car sped away, Elena fell into a deep unconsciousness, leaving her old life on the wet pavement behind her. The first thing Elena felt was warmth. It wasn't the stifling, dry heat of the Vance estate's central heating, but a gentle, enveloping warmth, like sunlight trapped in a blanket. She blinked her eyes open. The ceiling above her was high and painted with a soft fresco of clouds, nothing like the stark white minimalism Adrian preferred. The steady, rhythmic beep, beep, beep of a heart monitor told her she wasn't in heaven, but she wasn't in a standard hospital room either. "She's awake." A deep voice rumbled from the corner of the room. Elena turned her head. Sitting in a leather armchair, reading a file with reading glasses perched on his nose, was Julian Thorne. Panic spiked in her chest. She tried to sit up, but a gentle hand pushed her back down. A doctor she didn't recognize was standing by the bed. "Easy, Mrs. Vance," the doctor said. "I'm Dr. Aris. You've been unconscious for 3 days. Your platelet count was critically low. You were in septic shock." 3 days? Elena looked at Julian. Why am I here?" Julian closed the file and took off his glasses. He looked tired, his shirt sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms that looked like they actually did manual labor, unlike Adrian's manicured limbs. "Because the hospital had a mandatory reporting policy for neglect," Julian said calmly, though his eyes were flinty. "And I didn't think you wanted the police knocking on Adrian's door just yet. So, I brought you to my private wing." "Adrian," Elena's voice cracked. "Does he know?" Julian stood up and walked to the bedside. He hesitated, then pulled out his phone. "I debated showing you this. Dr. Aris said it might cause stress. But I think you deserve the truth more than you deserve protection." He handed her the phone. It was a screenshot of Chloe Sinclair's Instagram story from yesterday. It showed Adrian and Chloe on a yacht, holding champagne flutes. The caption read, "Celebrating the big merger. Hard work pays off. Power couple. Vance Global." "He hasn't called the police, Elena," Julian said softly. "He hasn't called the hospitals. As far as I can tell, he told his staff you went to visit your sister in Vermont." "I don't have a sister," Elena whispered, the phone shaking in her hand. "I know." The realization hit her harder than the car could have. Adrian hadn't just ignored her. He had erased her. To him, her absence wasn't a tragedy. It was a convenience. He probably thought she was sulking in a hotel room somewhere. He didn't care enough to check. The tears didn't come. Instead, a cold, hard stone formed in the pit of her stomach. It was the death of hope, and strangely, it was liberating. "Why are you helping me, Julian?" she asked, her voice gaining a fraction of strength. "You hate Adrian. You've been trying to buy him out for a decade." "I do hate him," Julian admitted, a dark smirk playing on his lips. "But I have never hated you. In fact, I've admired you. 5 years ago, the Valkyrie deal, the one where Vance Global acquired those shipping lanes in the Pacific?" "Yes," Elena nodded. "I negotiated that." "I know. Adrian took the credit, but I read the contract language. It had your syntax. It was brilliant. Adrian is a hammer. You were the scalpel. Seeing a scalpel left to rust in the rain offends me. Julian leaned in, his gaze intense. I didn't save you because you're a damsel in distress, Elena. I saved you because you are the smartest person Adrian Vance ever had, and he was too stupid to keep you alive. Get better. And then, let's make him regret the day he was born. For the next week, the dynamic in the Thorne estate was unlike anything Eleanor had ever known. At home, she was a burden. Here, she was a guest of honor. Julian's staff treated her with reverence. Dr. Aris visited 3 times a day, administering a new experimental treatment for her autoimmune condition. Treatment Adrian had claimed was too expensive and unproven, but which Julian paid for without blinking. But the most shocking thing was Julian himself. He didn't treat her like a porcelain doll. He treated her like a partner. In the evenings, he would bring his laptop to her room. "Look at this," he'd say, showing her a spreadsheet of a failing subsidiary. "Adrian is trying to offload this to Shell Corp. What am I missing?" Elena, propped up on pillows, would squint at the numbers. "He's hiding the debt in the pension fund. Look at line 45. If you buy that, you inherit the liability." Julian would grin, a genuine, boyish grin that made him look 10 years younger. "I knew it. You're a genius, Elena." It was a seduction, but not of the body. It was a seduction of the mind. Julian was feeding her confidence, nurturing the part of her that Adrian had starved, her intellect. One rainy afternoon, 2 weeks after the incident, Elena was sitting in the conservatory, watching the rain hit the glass. She was walking now, though slowly. She wore a silk robe Julian had bought for her. Midnight blue, not the beige Adrian always insisted on. Julian walked in. He looked grim. "It's done," he said. "What is?" "I had my legal team serve the papers. Not divorce papers. Adrian would fight those just to be petty. I served him with a lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty regarding your joint assets. It froze his personal accounts, just like he froze yours." Elena turned to look at him. "He's going to come for me." "Let him," Julian said. "But he won't come here. He thinks you're at a battered women's shelter. My lawyers leaked that misinformation. It makes him look bad, so he's avoiding the press. He's trapped, Elena. He can't admit you're missing without admitting he didn't look for you." "I need to see him," Elena said suddenly. Julian frowned. "Why?" "Because," Elena stood up, her legs stronger than they had been in months. "I need him to see that I'm not dead, and I need to sign the divorce papers myself. I want to look him in the eye when I take half his empire." Julian studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "The annual tech gala is in 3 months, Julian said. "Adrian will be there to announce his merger with Oakhaven. It's the biggest night of his life." 3 months, Elena repeated. She looked at her reflection in the glass door. She was still thin, but the color was returning to her cheeks. The fire was back in her eyes. "That gives me 90 days to become someone he doesn't recognize." 3 months is a long time in the world of business, and an eternity in the world of healing. Elena didn't just recover, she evolved. Under Dr. Aris's care, the new treatments worked miracles. Her platelet count stabilized. Her energy returned. She started yoga, then Pilates, then boxing. She needed to hit something. Julian gave her full access to his resources. She cut her hair. The long, heavy locks Adrian loved were chopped into a sharp, chic bob that framed her jawline. She dyed it a rich, dark chocolate. She threw away the beige and cream wardrobe Adrian preferred and filled her closet with crimson, emerald, and black. But the biggest change happened in the war room of Thorne Enterprises. Elena officially joined Julian as a silent consultant. She pored over Vance Global's public filings. She found the cracks in the foundation. Adrian is over-leveraged, Elena told Julian one night over dinner. They were eating in the kitchen, a domestic intimacy that had become natural between them. He borrowed against the Asian manufacturing plants to fund the Oakhaven merger. If the Oakhaven deal is delayed by even 48 hours, the loans get called in. He'll be insolvent. Julian swirled his wine. And how do we delay the deal? Elena smiled. It was a smile that would have terrified Adrian. The environmental impact report for Oakhaven. It expires on the 15th. The gala is on the 16th. Adrian fired the compliance officer who tracked those dates because he talked too much. Adrian doesn't know the permit is expiring. So, Julian leaned back, admiration glowing in his eyes. We just let it expire. We let him announce the merger on stage, Elena corrected. And then, right after the applause dies down, you announce that you've bought the debt from the bank that holds the Asian plants. Julian laughed softly. You are ruthless, Elena. I learned from the worst, she replied. As the gala approached, the tension in the city was palpable. Rumors were swirling about Adrian Vance. His perfect relationship with Chloe was showing cracks. Without Elena to manage his life, Adrian looked disheveled in paparazzi photos. Chloe was bored by the boardroom and spent his money faster than he could make it. The night of the gala arrived. It was held at the Metropolitan Opera House. The red carpet was swarming with reporters. Adrian Vance arrived in a limousine. He stepped out, forcing a smile. He looked thinner, his eyes darting around nervously. Chloe hung on his arm, wearing a dress that was too loud and too revealing for a corporate event. She was checking her reflection in her phone, ignoring the press questions. "Mr. Vance! Mr. Vance! Where is your wife?" a reporter shouted. "Elena is still recovering in the countryside," Adrian lied smoothly, though sweat beaded on his forehead. "She sends her love." Inside the ballroom, the elite of the business world gathered. Adrian worked the room, but he was sweating. He needed this merger to close tonight. Suddenly, the room went quiet. The heavy double doors at the top of the grand staircase swung open. Julian Thorne stepped in. He looked impeccable in a tuxedo, radiating power and calm. But no one was looking at Julian. They were looking at the woman on his arm. She wore a gown of liquid gold that clung to every curve of her healthy, strong body. Her back was bare, her skin glowing. Her dark hair was sharp, her lips painted a deep blood red. She wore no jewelry except for a pair of vintage emerald earrings that matched her eyes. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a queen. Adrian froze mid-sentence. He dropped his champagne glass. It shattered on the marble floor, but he didn't hear it. "Who is that?" Chloe asked, squinting. "Is that a model?" Adrian felt the blood drain from his face. "No," he whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of horror and sudden, agonizing desire. "That's my wife." Elena and Julian began to descend the stairs. Every eye was on them. Elena locked eyes with Adrian across the room. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of the executioner greeting the condemned. Julian leaned down and whispered in her ear, loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "Ready to take back what's yours?" "I don't want it back, Julian," Elena replied, her voice smooth and confident. "I want to burn it down." They reached the bottom of the stairs. The crowd parted, creating a path directly to Adrian. Adrian took a step forward, his mind reeling. "Elena, you look alive?" Elena finished for him. She stopped 2 feet away from him. The scent of her expensive perfume, Sandalwood and jasmine, Julian's favorite, wafted over him, replacing the cloying smell of vanilla he used to like. "You're supposed to be in Vermont," Adrian stammered. "And you're supposed to be a faithful husband," Elena said, her voice carrying through the silent room. We both seemed to be full of surprises. "Elena, baby." Adrian tried to touch her arm, his charm reflex kicking in. "We need to talk. You look incredible. Let's go home." Chloe stepped forward, looking insecure and angry. "Excuse me? Who do you think you are?" Elena turned her gaze to Chloe. She looked at the mistress with not anger, but pity. "I'm the woman who built the throne you're trying to sit on," Elena said calmly. "And I'm the woman who is about to kick the legs out from under it." She turned back to Adrian. "Enjoy your speech, Adrian. I'll be listening very closely." She took Julian's arm, and they walked past him, leaving Adrian Vance standing in the shattered glass of his own champagne, while the whispers of the crowd turned into a roar. The ballroom was buzzing with whispers, a hive of bees disturbed by a sudden storm. Adrian Vance wiped his clammy hands on his tuxedo trousers. He needed to regain control of the narrative. He was the CEO. This was his night. He marched to the podium, tapping the microphone. The feedback screech silenced the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Adrian's voice boomed, though it lacked its usual steady cadence. "Thank you for the dramatic entrance. It seems my wife has made a miraculous recovery. But tonight is about the future. Tonight, I am proud to announce the merger between Vance Global and Oakhaven Tech, creating the largest logistics conglomerate in the hemisphere." Scattered applause. Most people were looking at Julian Thorne, who was calmly sipping a fresh glass of champagne in the front row, with Eleanor seated like a statue beside him. "This merger," Adrian continued, talking faster, "is secured by our manufacturing assets in Southeast Asia. It is a deal worth $4 billion. Actually, it's worth $0. A voice cut through the air. It wasn't Julian. It was Eleanor. She didn't shout. She simply spoke into the silence, and her voice carried with crystal clarity. She stood up, the gold dress shimmering under the stage lights. "Eleanor, sit down," Adrian hissed, covering the mic. "We'll talk about this later." "No, Adrian, we'll talk about it now." Elena walked toward the stage. She didn't take the stairs. She stood at the base of the platform, looking up at him. "You mentioned the manufacturing assets in Southeast Asia. The ones in Vietnam and Thailand?" "Yes, of course," Adrian laughed nervously, addressing the crowd. "My wife, always the micromanager. Those assets were collateral for the loans you took out to pay for this venue, your new yacht, and—" Elena glanced at Chloe, who was shrinking into her chair. "Marketing expenses." "So what?" Adrian snapped, losing his cool. "The loans are in good standing." "They were," Elena corrected, "until this morning. You see, the environmental permits for those factories expired yesterday at midnight. You fired the compliance officer, so no one renewed them. That put the factories in violation of international law, which triggered a default clause in your loan agreement." The room went deadly silent. The investors in the room knew exactly what that meant. "The bank put the debt up for auction this morning at 9 a.m., Elena continued, her eyes locking onto his. "And by 9:05 a.m. it was purchased." Adrian gripped the podium. His knuckles were white. "Purchased? By who?" Julian Thorne stood up. He buttoned his jacket slowly, a predator rising from the grass. "By Thorne Enterprises," Julian said, his voice deep and amused. "Which means, Adrian, I now own your factories, and since you defaulted, I'm calling in the debt. Immediately." You can't," Adrian stammered. He looked at the Oakhaven CEO, Mr. Sterling, who was sitting at a VIP table. "Sterling, tell them the deal is signed." Mr. Sterling stood up, looking furious. The deal was contingent on those factories being operational, Vance. If you don't own them, you have nothing to sell me. The deal is off. No! Adrian screamed, the veneer of the sophisticated CEO shattering completely. I have the patents. I have the fleet. Actually, Elena interrupted again, the patents were registered under the Vance family trust. My trust. You transferred them there 3 years ago for tax purposes. Remember? You said I was too stupid to touch them, so they'd be safe. She smiled, a cold, terrifying expression. I've revoked your license to use them, effective immediately. The crowd gasped. In the span of 3 minutes, Adrian Vance had gone from a billionaire to a man with no assets, massive debt, and no product. Adrian looked around the room. He saw the pity in the eyes of his peers. He saw the flashing cameras capturing his ruin. He looked for Chloe. "Chloe!" he shouted. "Tell them. We have the marketing strategy." He pointed to the table where Chloe had been sitting. The chair was empty. Chloe Sinclair was already near the exit, her phone pressed to her ear. As she passed a reporter, Adrian heard her say, "I barely know him. I was just an employee. I'm resigning effective immediately. Please, no photos." She didn't even look back. Adrian slumped against the podium. The microphone gave a high-pitched whine, mirroring the ringing in his ears. He looked down at Eleanor. "Why?" he whispered, his voice broken. "I'm your husband." Elena walked up the stairs, her heels clicking on the stage. She stopped inches from him. She reached out and took the microphone from his trembling hand. "You were my husband when I was dying on the bathroom floor," she said into the mic, broadcasting her words to the world. "You were my husband when you stepped over me to go to dinner with your mistress. You were my husband when you froze my bank accounts to save money for your yacht." She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper only he could hear. "Now, you're just a trespasser in my building. Get out." The morning after the gala, the sun rose over the city skyline, casting long, golden shadows against the glass towers of the financial district. But inside the headquarters of Vance Global, the mood was apocalyptic. Adrian Vance had not slept. He had spent the night in a hotel room, not his usual suite at the Ritz-Carlton, but a mid-tier airport hotel near the highway, the only place that would accept a credit card that hadn't yet been flagged by the fraud department. At 8 a.m. sharp, he stood in the lobby of his own building. He swiped his access card at the turnstile. Beep, beep, beep. A red light flashed. Access denied. There must be a mistake, Adrian snapped at the security guard, a man named Miller, whom Adrian had ignored every morning for 10 years. "Miller, let me in. The system is glitching." Miller didn't move to open the gate. He looked down at a clipboard, his expression unreadable. "No mistake, Mr. Vance. I have a directive from the board of directors. You've been suspended pending an internal audit. You are not permitted on the premises." "Suspended?" Adrian's voice rose an octave, cracking. "I am the CEO. I built this building. You can't keep me out." "Actually, they can." Adrian spun around. Standing behind him were 2 men in dark suits, holding briefcases, flanked by a uniformed police officer. He recognized one of them, Marcus Thorne, the lead counsel for Julian Thorne's acquisition team. "Mr. Vance," Marcus said, his voice smooth and professional, the kind of voice that delivered ruin with a smile. "As of 9 a.m. this morning, Thorne Enterprises has executed the lien on the Vance Global subsidiaries. Since those subsidiaries hold the lease on this headquarters, we are technically your landlords now. And you are trespassing." "This is illegal," Adrian hissed, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the air conditioning. "I'll sue you. I'll sue Julian. I'll burn this place to the ground." "You're welcome to try," Marcus replied, handing him a thick envelope. "But I suggest you save your legal fees for your defense. The Securities and Exchange Commission has opened an investigation into your transfer of patents to the family trust. Tax fraud is a serious allegation, Adrian." The police officer stepped forward. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the property, or I will be forced to escort you out in handcuffs." Adrian looked around the lobby. Employees were streaming in. People he had hired, people he had screamed at, people he had underpaid. They stopped to watch. Some pulled out their phones to record. There was no pity in their eyes, only a morbid curiosity. Humiliated, Adrian snatched the envelope and stormed out the revolving doors. As he hit the sidewalk, a paparazzi flash blinded him. They were waiting. The headline on the newsstand kiosk screamed in bold black letters, "Vance vanquished, the billion-dollar bluff." The collapse was not a slow slide. It was a freefall. By noon, the bank had foreclosed on the penthouse. The mortgage payments had been tied to the company's stock performance, a risky clause Adrian had signed in arrogance, believing the stock would only ever go up. When the share price hit $2.40 a share, the trigger was pulled. Adrian rushed to the apartment to salvage what he could. He found the locks already changed. A notice from the city marshal was taped to the mahogany door. He banged on the door until his fists bruised. "Open up! My watches are in there! My safe!" The door opened, but it wasn't a marshal. It was Mrs. Higgins, the housekeeper he had forced Elena to fire months ago because she cost too much. "Mrs. Higgins?" Adrian breathed, relieved. "Thank God, let me in. I need to get the safe." Mrs. Higgins stood in the doorway, blocking his path. She wore a visitor's badge. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Mr. Vance. I'm here assisting the auditors with the inventory. Everything inside is considered a seized asset." "But my clothes, my passport?" "The auditors have packed a box of personal essentials for you," she said, pointing to a cardboard box sitting in the hallway. "Toothbrush, 2 suits, some underwear. The rest, the Rolexes, the artwork, the electronics. Stay." Adrian looked at the woman who had served his family for years. "Mrs. Higgins, please. I have nowhere to go. Let me just grab the cash from the safe. I know the code." Mrs. Higgins looked at him, her eyes sad but firm. "Mrs. Vance called me this morning. She offered me a job managing the estate she plans to buy. She asked how you were." "She did?" Adrian felt a spark of hope. Is she worried about me?" "No," Mrs. Higgins said coldly. "She wanted to make sure I locked the service entrance so you couldn't sneak in." She closed the door in his face. The click of the deadbolt echoed like a gunshot. 3 days later, the reality of his new life had set in. Adrian was staying in a motel in Queens, the kind of place where the neon sign buzzed all night, and the sirens never stopped. He had sold his cufflinks to a pawn shop for $400 just to pay for the room and some takeout. He sat on the lumpy mattress, staring at his phone. He had called Chloe Sinclair 47 times. On the 48th attempt, the line connected. "Chloe!" Adrian shouted, gripping the phone. "Chloe, baby, where are you? I've been going out of my mind. We need to leave the city. I have an offshore account in the Caymans. I just need to figure out the password." "Adrian, stop!" Chloe's voice was icy. There was background noise, laughter, music, the clink of silverware. "Where are you?" "I'm in Cabo," she said. "With friends." "Cabo? We were supposed to go there for your birthday next week." "Yeah, well, plans change. Look, Adrian, my lawyer advised me not to speak to you. You're being investigated for fraud. I can't have that attached to my brand." "Your brand?" Adrian laughed, a manic, hysterical sound. "I bought you that brand. I paid for your apartment. I put you on the cover of Forbes. And now you're a liability, she cut him off. Oh, and by the way, the earrings, the diamond studs you gave me, I had them appraised. They're lab-grown, cheap, just like you. The line went dead. Adrian stared at the wall. The mold spot on the wallpaper looked like a laughing face. He felt a pain in his chest, a tight, crushing pressure. For the first time, he wasn't faking it. The stress was eating him alive. He realized then that he had no one. He had built a life on transactions, and now that his currency was gone, he was bankrupt in every sense of the word. There was only one person who had ever loved him when he was nothing. One person who had signed the prenup without reading it, because she trusted him. One person who had nursed him through the flu in their first tiny apartment. Elena. The iron gates of the Thorne estate were formidable, towering 12 feet high and topped with gold spikes. It was raining, a cold, biting sleet that heralded the coming winter. Adrian stood by the intercom. He had walked 3 miles from the bus stop because he couldn't afford a cab. His Italian leather shoes were soaked through. His suit was wrinkled, the collar stained. He looked nothing like the titan of industry he had been a week ago. "Please," he said into the speaker, "just 5 minutes. Tell her I'm dying." He waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20. He was shivering violently, his teeth chattering. Just as he was about to turn away, the heavy gates groaned and swung open. Adrian's heart leapt. She still cared. She wouldn't let him freeze. He walked up the long gravel driveway. The house was glowing with warmth. Through the bay windows, he could see a fire roaring in the hearth. Elena was standing on the covered porch. She wasn't wearing a hospital gown or a robe. She was dressed in a thick, cream-colored cable-knit sweater and dark jeans, holding a mug of tea. Her hair was shiny, her skin rosy. She looked peaceful. Standing a few feet behind her, leaning against a stone pillar, was Julian Thorne. He didn't look aggressive. He looked like a man who was completely secure in his territory. Adrian stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. He looked up at her, water dripping from his nose. "Eleanor," he choked out. "You look terrible, Adrian," she said. Her voice wasn't angry. It was factual. I lost everything," Adrian sobbed, falling to his knees on the wet gravel. It was a calculated move. He knew Elena had a soft heart. "The company, the house, the accounts. I'm sleeping in a motel. I have nothing to eat." Elena took a sip of her tea. "I remember when I couldn't eat because I couldn't afford the nausea medication. Do you remember that, Adrian? You told me to chew on ginger root." "I was stressed. I didn't mean it," Adrian pleaded. "I was trying to save the company for us, for our future." "No," Elena shook her head slowly. "You were saving it for yourself. You erased me, Adrian. You watched me fade away, and you turned up the volume on the TV so you wouldn't hear me coughing. I can change." Adrian crawled up one step. "I see it now. You're the only one who matters. Chloe, she was nothing, a distraction. You're my wife. We swore an oath, in sickness and in health." Julian stepped forward then. He didn't raise his voice, but his presence was like a physical wall. "That oath is a two-way street, Vance. You broke it the minute you let another woman wear her diamonds." Adrian ignored him, focusing his desperate gaze on Eleanor. "Eleanor, please. I have a pain in my chest. I think it's my heart. I need a doctor. I need help. Don't leave me to die like this." Elena looked at him. She saw the fear in his eyes. It was real. He was terrified. Not of losing her, but of being ordinary, of being poor, of being alone. She set her mug down on the railing and walked down the steps until she was standing right in front of him. She smelled of sandalwood and rain. "I won't leave you to die, Adrian," she said softly. Adrian let out a breath of relief. "Thank you." "Oh, thank you. I knew you still loved me." "I didn't say that," Elena corrected him. "I said I won't let you die, because death is an escape, and you have a long time to live with what you've done." She reached into her back pocket and pulled out a small, white business card. She tucked it into the breast pocket of his soaked suit jacket. "Dr. Aris runs a free clinic downtown on 4th Street, she said. "He treats the uninsured. He treats people who have been forgotten by the system. Go there. Stand in line. Wait your turn like everyone else. He'll check your heart." Adrian stared at her, the hope draining from his face, replaced by a dawning horror. You're not taking me back?" "The Elena you married is gone, Adrian. You killed her." She stepped back, ascending the stairs to where Julian waited. Julian wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her into his warmth. "Go now," Elena said, her voice final. "Before I call the police for trespassing. And Adrian?" He looked up, broken. "Try the ginger root. It really does help with the nausea." She turned around and walked back into the house. Julian followed, pausing only to give Adrian a look of utter dismissal before closing the heavy oak door. Adrian Vance was left alone in the dark. The warmth of the house was just a few feet away, but it might as well have been on the moon. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the card for the free clinic. "Dr. Aris. Walk-ins. Welcome." A sob ripped through his throat. He stood up, his legs shaking, and turned back toward the gate. The long walk down the driveway felt like a funeral procession for the man he used to be. Inside the house, the silence was comfortable. Elena sat on the sofa, tucking her legs under her. Julian sat beside her, adding a log to the fire. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. Elena watched the flames dance. She thought about the man in the rain. She felt a phantom ache in her chest, the ghost of the love she had carried for so long. But as she took a deep breath, her lungs filled with air, clear, pain-free air. "I felt sorry for him," she admitted. Julian tensed slightly. "But," she continued, turning to look at Julian, her eyes bright, "I felt more sorry for the woman I used to be. I spent 5 years trying to be enough for a man who was empty inside. I'm not doing that anymore." Julian smiled, reaching out to take her hand. His thumb brushed over her knuckles. "So, what now, Mrs. Vance? Or, should I say, Ms. Ross?" "Elena," she smiled. "Just Elena. And as for what's next?" She picked up a file from the coffee table. It was the acquisition plan for the new logistics division of Thorn Enterprises. "I think we need to restructure the Asian manufacturing division," she said, tapping the paper. "If we implement a fair wage policy and update the environmental protocols, we can increase efficiency by 15% within the first quarter." Julian laughed, leaning in to kiss her forehead. Music to my ears. Outside, the storm raged on, washing away the traces of Adrian Vance's footprints. But inside, amidst the blueprints and the firelight, Elena Ross was building something that no one could ever tear down again. Fate hadn't just reversed. It had finally set things right. And that is the story of how Elena Vance turned her pain into power. She taught Adrian the hardest lesson of all. Never mistreat the person who holds up your world, because when they leave, the sky falls on you. It's a brutal reminder that karma might be delayed, but it never misses an address. Adrian thought Elena was weak because she was kind, but he learned that the most dangerous creature on earth is a woman who has nothing left to lose. What about you? Have you ever stayed with someone who didn't appreciate you, hoping they would change? Or have you ever had a revenge glow-up, like Elena? Let me know your story in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice and romance, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. I post new dramas every week. Thanks for listening. And remember, know your worth, or someone else will set it for you. See you in the next video.